Zarek begins with a description of Earth, his voice calm but deliberate. Imagine a planet, he says, where the weather alone can annihilate entire civilizations. Earthquakes that tear the ground apart, hurricanes with winds that level cities, floods that swallow whole regions. The recruits, initially skeptical, listened closely now. They'd heard of natural disasters, but not to this scale. On Earth, Zarek continues, it's not just the weather. Everything is dangerous. Even the animals, the plants, everything is a potential threat. Predators that hunt with precision, venomous creatures that can kill with a single sting. It's a place where surviving a single day is a victory. He pauses, letting the weight of his words sink in. But the humans, they didn't just survive. They conquered. Not through brute strength or superior technology, but through ingenuity. They adapted to every threat, learned how to live in harmony with the chaos around them. One of the recruits, clearly unsettled, speaks up. But how? How could they thrive in such a place? Zarek smiles faintly. Humans are stubborn. They're relentless. Where other species might retreat in the face of such dangers, humans press forward. They find solutions, even when none seem possible. He leans in slightly, his voice growing more intense. There was a human military unit, stationed in a remote jungle. They were cut off from reinforcements, low on supplies, and facing an enemy far more advanced than they were. The enemy had drones, energy weapons, advanced tracking systems. The humans had sticks and stones. The recruits exchanged nervous glances. How could anyone survive that? They didn't panic, Zarek says, his eyes scanning the room. They used the jungle itself. They set traps, used the terrain to their advantage. They blended in, became part of the environment. The enemy had all the technology in the world, but they couldn't find them. Every time they got close, another trap would spring. The humans didn't just survive, they turned the jungle into their ally. The recruits are silent now, hanging on every word. Zarek's calm recounting of the events only adds to the tension. They waited. Zarek continues. 4 days, weeks even. The enemy grew frustrated, careless. And then, when the moment was right, the humans struck. Not with sophisticated weapons, but with precision and timing. They used the jungle's own dangers, venomous creatures, unstable ground, natural hazards, to wipe out their foes. They took down an army with little more than what the planet provided. A murmur spreads through the group. The idea that humans, with primitive tools and a hostile environment, could defeat a superior force was unsettling. They had always believed that technology was the ultimate advantage. But here was proof that it wasn't always the case. The humans didn't just survive on Earth, Zarek adds, his tone shifting slightly. They thrived. They became masters of adaptation. No matter what the planet threw at them, be it nature or invaders, they found a way to overcome. It wasn't about being the strongest. It was about being the most resourceful, the most determined. One recruit, clearly shaken, mutters, "But why? Why would anyone stay on a planet like that?" Zarek gives a small shrug. Because to them, Earth is home. It's where they learned what it truly means to endure. Their planet forged them into something stronger, more resilient than any advanced civilization could ever imagine. They don't just survive because of their environment, they survive despite it. The room is thick with tension now. The recruits had come in believing that their superior technology and peaceful upbringings made them the best. But hearing about the humans, about how they had adapted to such relentless challenges, was making them reconsider. Zarek pauses, letting his words settle. The recruits are no longer laughing or dismissing his story. Their initial arrogance has been replaced with a quiet understanding. They're beginning to grasp just how much they had underestimated these so-called Deathworlders. Earth, Zarek says softly, is not unique. It's just one of many Deathworlds out there. And humans? They aren't the only ones who have learned to conquer their deadly environments. The recruits shift in their seats, clearly unsettled. They had thought they were invincible, that their advanced technologies and peaceful worlds made them untouchable. But now, they were beginning to understand that survival wasn't just about having the best tools or the safest environment. It was about resilience, determination, and a willingness to adapt. Zarek's gaze sweeps over the group. Earth was just the beginning, he says, his voice low and steady. There are other worlds out there, just as deadly, just as unforgiving. And there are other species who have learned how to survive them. The room is silent. The recruits, who had been so full of confidence just moments ago, are now left with a growing sense of unease. They're starting to realize that the universe is much larger and much deadlier than they had ever imagined. Zarek leans back slightly, his expression unreadable. But Earth was not the only death world, he says quietly, his words hanging in the air. The recruits stare at him, their expressions a mix of disbelief and fear. The stories they had once laughed at now seemed all too real. And the reality of what they might face was beginning to sink in. Zarek says nothing more, leaving the recruits to sit in stunned silence, their minds racing as they try to comprehend the full scope of what they've just learned. Zarek begins to speak, his voice steady as he recounts the tale of Carthan. Imagine a planet where the air is thin, so thin that each breath feels like a battle. A place where the freezing cold can snap the life out of you in minutes if you aren't careful. The snow isn't soft or forgiving, it's sharp as glass, driven by howling winds that can strip the flesh from bone. The recruits shift uneasily. They've never experienced such conditions and can't fully comprehend how anyone could survive in such a place. Carthan was a human colony, built on that icy death world. The humans there had adapted to the environment. They knew its dangers well, but it was home to them. They didn't just survive there, they thrived. But an alien army didn't see it that way. They saw an easy target, thin air, freezing temperatures, and predators that roamed the wilderness. They thought that humans, even with their knowledge of the planet, would crumble under a real invasion. Zarek's eyes gleam with a hint of amusement. They were wrong. The recruits lean in, their previous confidence replaced with growing discomfort. When the invasion began, the aliens used their superior weapons and numbers. They believed they could overwhelm the colony quickly, but they underestimated one crucial thing. The humans had learned to live with the planet, not against it. Carthan wasn't just a home to them, it was a weapon. And the humans knew how to wield it. He pauses for a moment, letting the gravity of the situation settle. The aliens landed in what they thought was the perfect location, away from human settlements, where they could gather their forces and strike. What they didn't realize was that they had landed in the middle of a predator's hunting ground. The humans didn't need to fight the invaders directly. They let the planet do it for them. One recruit frowns, trying to piece together the implications of what Zarek is saying. You mean, they used the predators? Zarek nods. Exactly. The humans set up decoys, false trails, and traps, leading the alien forces deeper into the wilds. They lured them into snowstorms, into the territories of the most dangerous creatures on the planet. Predators that could tear through armor like it was paper. The humans didn't fire a shot for days. They just waited. Let the cold, the thin air, and the creatures wear the aliens down. The recruits are visibly shaken now. The idea that an entire army could be decimated by the environment, with barely any direct combat, is unnerving. They had always believed that advanced weapons and technology were the keys to victory. This was something else entirely. Zarek continues, his tone unchanging, almost cold. The aliens finally realized what was happening, but it was too late. Their forces were scattered, exhausted, and terrified. They had lost too many to the planet's natural dangers. That's when the humans struck. He leans forward slightly. They came in with precision. Small teams, trained to fight in those extreme conditions, hit the alien forces where they were weakest. The humans used the snowstorms to cover their movements, the thin air to outlast their enemies. The cold, which had sapped the strength from the invaders, was their ally. The planet that had been an enemy to the aliens became the humans' greatest weapon. The recruits are silent now, their bravado completely stripped away. Zarek's words paint a picture that they had never considered. It wasn't just about surviving on a death world, it was about mastering it, using its dangers as tools. One by one, the alien armies fell, Zarek says, his voice quiet yet intense. Their advanced weapons were useless in a place where nature itself was deadlier than any bullet or laser. And the humans, those Deathworlders, they didn't stop until the last invader was gone. The tension in the room is palpable. The recruits, once so sure of their superiority, now seem small, vulnerable. They had thought their advanced civilizations made them invincible, but Zarek's stories were making them question everything they believed. The humans of Carthan didn't just defend their colony, Zarek says. They turned their world into a fortress, a weapon that no army could hope to defeat. And they did it not with technology, but with cunning, patience, and an understanding of their environment that no outsider could ever match. The recruits exchanged nervous glances. The concept of using an entire planet as a weapon is something none of them had ever considered. It's a level of warfare that goes beyond anything they'd been trained for. The lessons of Carthan were harsh, Zarek adds, his voice soft but filled with weight. But the war, it was far from over. The recruits sit in stunned silence, their minds racing. The story of Carthan has shaken them to their core. They had come to the outpost with arrogance, believing that their superior technology made them unbeatable. But now, they're beginning to understand that in the vast, dangerous universe, it's not always the strongest who survive. Sometimes it's those who know how to turn their surroundings into their greatest weapon. Zarek's eyes narrow as he finishes, and the recruits can't shake the feeling that they've just scratched the surface of what it truly means to live and fight on a death world. Zarek's voice takes on a weightier tone as he begins the final tale. The war of attrition, he says, wasn't just about winning battles. It was about surviving long enough to outlast an enemy who had every advantage: technology, numbers, supplies. And still, the humans endured. They didn't just fight on one front, they fought on many, often with no reinforcements and no hope of immediate relief. It was a different kind of war, a war of survival, where every day was a battle against more than just the enemy. The recruits are visibly more attentive now. They've come to realize that Zarek's stories are more than war tales, they're lessons in endurance. Lessons in the sheer willpower it takes to survive the unimaginable. He continues, in some of the most hostile environments known, humans fought. Deserts where the sun would blister their skin and where water was more valuable than weapons. Jungles thick with disease, poisonous plants, and predators more vicious than anything their enemies could throw at them. And through all of it, they persisted. Zarek glances at the recruits, whose faces have now lost their arrogance, replaced by something closer to awe. It wasn't just about physical endurance. The conditions, starvation, the spread of disease, the constant danger, tested their minds as much as their bodies. Isolation, the feeling of being abandoned, slowly ate away at their morale. Many broke under the weight of it, but most found something deep inside themselves. Something that went beyond training or tactics. It was raw survival instinct. The will to keep moving when your legs feel like they can't go another step. The will to fight when there's nothing left to give. The recruits' expressions grow more somber. For the first time, they see warfare as more than just strategy or skill. They see it as something deeply psychological, where victory comes down to who can hold on the longest, even when every fiber of their being is telling them to quit. There was one human unit, Zarek says, his voice softening, sent to the edge of a desert planet. They were cut off, with no hope of supply drops or reinforcements for months. They had limited food and water, and the desert wasn't their only enemy. The local wildlife, creatures they'd never seen before, hunted them day and night. The sandstorms tore at their equipment, broke down their vehicles. It was as if the entire world was trying to kill them. But they survived. He pauses to let the weight of his words sink in. The recruits don't say anything. They're too absorbed in the story. They adapted. They scavenged. They found ways to make the environment work for them. Water from plants they didn't know were drinkable. Shelter from the bones of giant creatures long dead. And when their enemy finally arrived, expecting to find a defeated and broken force, they found humans ready to fight. Zarek's gaze hardens. That's the lesson here. Humans don't just survive, When they're pushed to the brink, they adapt. They find a way, even when it seems impossible. The recruits are silent. They had come to this outpost believing that their superior technology and training made them unstoppable, but Zarek's stories have forced them to confront a different reality, one where survival isn't about who has the best tools, but who has the strongest will. Zarek continues, "But the war of attrition wasn't just about one battle. It was about enduring days, weeks, months of hardship, with no end in sight. The psychological toll was immense. Soldiers began to question everything, why they were there, if help was coming, if it was even worth it. Some cracked under the pressure, succumbing to despair. But for those who held on, who refused to let their minds break, victory wasn't just about winning the fight. It was about proving to themselves that they could survive anything." The recruits exchange uneasy glances. They've trained in simulators, practiced strategy, learned the mechanics of war. But none of that has prepared them for the idea that war could be just as much about mental endurance as it is about skill. Zarek leans forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You see, sometimes survival isn't about what you can see. It's about what's inside you. The strength you didn't know you had. The ability to endure the unimaginable. Humans didn't just survive the war of attrition because of their weapons or tactics. They survived because they had the will to do so, even when everything seemed hopeless." The recruits, now sitting in stunned silence, seemed to be grappling with what they've just heard. They had never imagined that war could be fought on such grueling terms, that it could come down to nothing more than sheer determination to stay alive. Zarek finishes with a final, quiet statement. "Sometimes survival is more about what you can't see. And that's something no amount of training can prepare you for." The group of recruits sauntered into the outpost, their chatter loud and filled with an air of superiority. Each one seemed to carry a sense of pride, as if their homeworlds were the pinnacle of advancement. One of them, a tall figure with scaled skin, boasted, "Where I come from, war is just a simulation. No real need for it when everything's automated." Another, with insect-like features, chimed in. "Same. Our defense systems are so advanced, we haven't seen actual combat in centuries. I mean, who would want to fight in the first place?" The group laughed, amused by the idea of anyone needing to physically engage in battle in this day and age. To them, war was a relic of the past, a crude practice that advanced civilizations had long outgrown. Zarek entered quietly, unnoticed at first. He didn't fit the image they had conjured of a war veteran, no imposing figure or intimidating presence. Just a calm, almost indifferent demeanor that made him seem out of place. One of the recruits noticed him and whispered to another, "That's him? That's the warrior we've been hearing about." The second recruit snorted. "Hard to believe, right? I expected more. I don't know, scars or something." Their snickers didn't escape Zarek's notice, but he didn't react. He approached the group with a steady gaze, his silence unsettling the recruits just enough to make them stop talking. They were waiting for him to speak, maybe expecting some kind of grand speech or a display of authority. Instead, he simply observed them for a moment. "You've all heard of Deathworlders, haven't you?" Zarek asked, his voice even and unbothered. The group shared confused glances. Deathworlders were the stuff of myth, exaggerated tales told to scare young soldiers. "Deathworlders?" One of the recruits finally spoke up, grinning. "You mean those ridiculous stories about people surviving on hostile planets? That's nothing but legend." The others laughed in agreement. Deathworlds, in their eyes, were just exaggerated fiction. The idea that anyone could thrive on such dangerous planets was absurd. Zarek waited until the laughter died down, still unfazed. "Have you ever heard of Earth?" There was a pause. Some of them had heard the name, but it was just another backwater planet, unremarkable in every way. "Yeah, I've heard of it," one recruit said dismissively. "Nothing special. Some minor planet with primitive technology." Zarek gave a faint smile. "Earth is a death world." The group fell silent. The laughter, the arrogance, all of it evaporated in an instant. They stared at Zarek, waiting for the punchline that never came. "No way," one recruit muttered. You can't be serious. I'm very serious, Zarek said calmly. Earth is a place where life fights to survive every single day. Earthquakes that rip apart cities. Storms that can wipe entire regions off the map. Predators that hunt relentlessly. And the humans who live there? They've learned to conquer it all. The recruits shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't what they'd expected. They had come in with their egos inflated, believing that advanced technology was all that mattered. But the way Zarek spoke made them reconsider. They didn't just survive on Earth, Zarek continued, his eyes scanning the group. They thrived. They adapted to every challenge their world threw at them. When the planet itself tried to kill them, they fought back. And they didn't stop there. When other species thought they could conquer Earth, the humans used their planet as a weapon. The recruits exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't a story they'd heard before. The tone in the room had shifted dramatically. One of them, trying to regain some composure, laughed nervously. So you're saying humans, what? Tamed a Deathworld? Zarek tilted his head slightly. Tamed? No. They never tamed it. But they learned to survive. They learned to turn the planet's dangers into their greatest asset. The group fell silent once again. There was no room for laughter now. The gravity of Zarek's words was starting to settle in. But Earth, Zarek said softly, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to fill the room, was not the only death world. The recruits, now leaning in, waited for what he'd say next. There was no arrogance left in their eyes, only curiosity and a hint of fear. What they thought was myth was quickly becoming something far more real. Zarek's calm, unwavering demeanor was a stark contrast to their earlier bravado. He wasn't trying to scare them. He was just telling the truth. The room seemed to close in on them, their confidence replaced by an unsettling sense of dread. They had come to this outpost believing they were the best of the best, superior in every way. But now, with every word Zarek spoke, that belief was crumbling. Before anyone could speak, Zarek took a breath and began to tell them the first story. Let me tell you about Earth, he said, his voice steady and unhurried. A world where nature itself is the deadliest enemy you could face. The recruits sat frozen, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them as they prepared to listen. This was no longer just a briefing. This was something else entirely. Zarek stands silent for a moment, his eyes scanning the group of recruits now sitting in stunned silence. The weight of his stories lingers heavily in the air. Finally, he speaks, his voice steady but carrying a new gravity. You think all of this was about humans? No. I was there, fighting alongside them. The recruits look up, startled by the revelation. Zarek had been a part of the very stories that had shaken them to their core. I fought with humans on death worlds you can't imagine, he continues. Not just Earth, but places even more dangerous, more unforgiving. And it wasn't their weapons that kept them alive. It was their will. They refused to break, no matter what was thrown at them. And I learned something from them, something you need to understand. The recruits, their arrogance thoroughly dismantled, hang on every word now. Zarek paces slowly, his demeanor calm but intense. Your training, your technology, none of it matters if you don't have the will to survive. The humans I fought with didn't always have the best equipment or the strongest armies, but they had something more important. They knew how to endure. Zarek pauses, letting the message sink in. The recruits, once so sure of their superiority, now seem unsure, questioning themselves for the first time. He presses on. I learned that true warriors aren't forged in simulations or strategy rooms. They're made in the moments when you've lost everything, and yet you still find a way to keep going. That's survival. That's what I've been trying to teach you. Before anyone can respond, the outpost's alarms suddenly blare, shattering the quiet tension. An urgent, robotic voice echoes through the walls, announcing an attack. The recruits jump to their feet, panic flashing in their eyes. Zarek doesn't flinch. Instead, he calmly walks to his gear, donning his armor with practiced efficiency. His movements are deliberate, controlled, as if this moment was always coming. Without missing a beat, Zarek turns to the recruits. You thought you were ready? Now's the time to prove it. The recruits scrambled to get their own gear, their earlier bravado now fully evaporated, replaced by a sense of dread. For the first time, they're about to face a real enemy, one that isn't a training simulation, but a threat to their very lives. As they prepare, Zarek offers no comforting words, no pep talk. Instead, he looks each of them in the eye, making sure they understand the gravity of the situation. This is your death world, he says coldly. Everything you've heard, everything you've laughed at, is real now. You're about to see what it means to survive when the odds are stacked against you. The recruits, fully armed now, follow Zarek as he leads them toward the impending battle. Their minds are racing, filled with thoughts of the stories he's just told, and the reality they're about to face. The weight of the moment hangs heavy over them. This is no longer a lesson, this is a test of everything they've just learned. As they approach the exit, Zarek stops, turning one last time to face them. His voice is calm, but it carries an edge that cuts through the tension. Welcome to your death world, he says, and with that, he steps into the fray, leaving the recruits no choice but to follow.